The goal of today's webinar is to learn the basics of 2D machining or 2D milling. As you know, my name is Al DiPaolo. I'm the voice of the BobCAD After Dark video series. You can find me on Instagram at BobCAD-CAM, or you can search hashtag BobCAD or hashtag BobCAM. Again, what are we going to learn today? We're picking up this part 2. We did the wireframe to solid webinar, then we did the 2D milling last week, but we kind of ran out of time, so I just want to spend a little more time this week. And again, with BobCAD, you can always expect fewer steps, better cuts, and more profit. Now, while I'm getting my screen set up, why don't you give me a little shout out? I know I have Erwin here from Texas, or I'm sorry, from New Jersey. We have Doug. Doug, thank you so much for joining us from Seattle here. Let's see, we got Rick in Tampa, Larry in Illinois, Reginald out of San Diego, Tom in North Carolina. Let's see, we got Ron out of Pennsylvania, Mike out of, I'm not sure where that is, Dale out of Dale, Vic from Ohio. Again, I appreciate each and every one of you spending some time with me here today. I know you guys are busy, and time is money, so I do appreciate your time. Let's see, we got Jamie from Austin. Okay, so a little house cleaning. If this is your first webinar, how you communicate with me is through the question panel. John from Claremont, California, thank you so much. John from New Mexico. Okay, so how you guys communicate with me is with the panel. There's a question area, and you can type in questions there. That's number one. Number two, there's no such thing as a bad question. So any question that you have, just type it into the panel, the question area, and I'll be able to see it, and I'll do my best to answer it as we go. If this is your first webinar with BobCAD, the first time you're joining one of our webinars, if you could just write in, "This is my first webinar," I would appreciate that. So that way I know that you're new to our group here, and I really appreciate that. Number two, we send you recordings of our webinar, okay? A lot of people have requested, hey, where's the recording? If you are not seeing the recording in your inbox, I do recommend you check your spam folder. BobCAD does send a lot of emails in general. Hey, Dan, welcome. Thank you so much for attending your first webinar with us. Any questions you have, please let me know. Thank you so much. Okay, so if you're not getting the webinar recordings, it's likely it could be in your spam folder. So if you check your spam folder, you'll see the history of the webinars that we've been sending. Once you're signed up for a webinar, we do email you out a recorded copy. Hey, Guy, thank you so much for showing up here today. Again, I really appreciate you spending some time with us. Okay, so if it is your first webinar, definitely let me know. Just type in, "This is my first webinar." That'd be great. The second thing, you will get an email recording of this webinar. If you are not getting it, it's likely it's in your spam folder. Don had a question here. Where do I find the previous recorded? I signed up for all, but I can't make most. Like I said, if you've signed up for the webinar, we email you a recording. So if you check your inbox, or if you're not seeing them in your inbox, your spam folder is likely where that will be. Okay. The other thing that I want to touch on real quick is just different ways that you can communicate with us, okay? So one of the things that's become very popular right now is our Facebook groups. I know not everybody is on Facebook, and I understand that. But for those of you that are on Facebook, let me see if I can get to where I want to go here. We have these great groups that you can search. Now, basically, to find them, if you just go to Facebook and you search BobCAD After Dark group or BobCAD group, our groups will come up. You can click on one of the groups here. You will have to answer some questions. Basically, I just want to know why you want to join the group, and then there are a bunch of there's a bunch of information that we have in here. So there's videos that are posted. You can talk with other users, other workflow, question and answers, tips and tricks. This is a great way to learn more about the BobCAD software and talk with other users. So if you haven't signed up for one of our Facebook groups, do it today. Go to Facebook, search the BobCAD group. Pick the one, if you're in Texas, pick the Texas one. We'll be adding more groups as we go, but this is, again, a great way to communicate with other BobCAD users and to get information about the software that you may not be able to find otherwise, after hours, on the weekends, etc. Okay, very good. Now, another thing that I wanted to touch on real quick, if there are any specific features, I know a lot of you come in and you join these webinars on a regular basis. If there are any specific features or topics that you would like to see in the up-and-coming webinars, please just write in things that you would like to learn about, whether it's 3D machining or 5-axis machining, whatever the case might be. It would be great to go through that. It'd be great to go through what you want to see, and by you writing in what you'd want to see, that will help us with the coming up topics. Okay, all right, so where are we at? What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little review here. I'm going to take our model, and what's the best way to go? Okay, I'm going to take our model, I'm going to copy it, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to paste our file in here. Okay, so we have our model. Again, if you want to see the CAD, if you want to rewatch the CAD webinar for this, if you request it, I'll make sure to email you a copy of the first stage or first step where we created the wireframe and turned this into a solid. Okay, so again, we're talking about 2D machining features. This part here, we have some pretty prismatic type shapes, pockets, profiles, radiuses, so not super complicated geometry, but always a really good place to start when you're getting familiar with the program and learning about its workflow. If you start with the 2D machining, I think that really helps out, okay? All right, let's see here. So with every job, you got to run the stock wizard, so we'll run the stock wizard through. We're going to come in and set our 0. Our 0 is going to be on the top of the part. That's fine. All right, we're going to blank our stock out here. All right, and we're going to talk about some 2D machining right off the bat. Let's talk about drilling for a second. If we wanted to, yep, no problem, Marty. I'll send you a copy of that. Just make sure you give me a valid email address, and I'll have that emailed to you after today's webinar. All right, so we got our stock set up here. So we have our milling job. We have our stock set up, and we have our machine set up here, okay? So now we're going to start loading in features, and there's a lot of different features you can pull in. We're going to go with mill, drill, hole. From here, we're going to choose select geometry. And from select geometry, we can start picking different parts of our geometry we want to work with. We can pick cylindrical faces, so if you have a solid model, you can come around and pick the cylindrical faces you want to work with. So the good thing about when working with the cylinders like this, the software is going to read the top and bottom. It's going to read the diameter, it's going to read the depth, and it's also going to read the top of feature, this value right here. Let me highlight this, okay? So this top of feature value, this value here is coming directly off the surface model, okay? So that's important. If you're drilling holes and you have a solid model, if you select those cylindrical tubes, it's going to read in more information than if you just pick the point location or a section of an arc, all right? All right, so that is pretty important. If there's any questions about that, go ahead and let me know. All right, so we selected our geometry, we have our top of feature, we have our depth. Now, we may not want it to start at that shoulder. Maybe we're going to drill these holes. Like, let me cancel out of this. Maybe when we look at our process plan, like a process plan, you're going to look at the tools that you're going to use, the order in which you're going to use those tools, and how you're basically going to cut that part, right? So, a little slower. John asked if I could go a little slower. I'll do my best for you. Robert has a question probably later. If you have a job with more than one machine setup, can you use the results of one setup as the stock for the next? Yes, Robert, you can export your stock out. So, but let's get back to that in just a second here. All right. So we have our model up on the screen. Okay. When we look at this from a top view, we would, yes, face off the top of this part, but then we're also going to drill these holes here. Now, we may decide to drill the holes after we face it. We may decide to drill the holes after we've profiled this shoulder, because you can see there's this shoulder on the part here. So the order in which you do things definitely matters. If you have a solid model like this, and we're drilling these holes, I'm just going to select one of them for now. Okay, if I'm drilling these holes, this hole and I select that cylindrical tube, right, it's going to read the hole diameter, it's going to read the depth, okay? When I go to next, it's also going to read the top of feature and the depth, okay? If I wanted it to start drilling from 0 instead of at the depth of the shoulder, what would you do? Well, where it says top of feature, I could do two things here. Either I could 0 this by just entering 0, and then for the depth, I could set what the depth is, okay? That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is I could say pick top, and then I could pick where I want the top to be. And then where it says depth, I could say pick bottom, and then I could pick where the bottom that I want to be. So you could either enter or select that right off that model, okay? All right, we compute this. You know, now we can see that our spot drill is going to come down, and it's going to spot this and come back out, okay? So let me go through this again. Let's delete this feature here, okay? We're going to right-click on the machine setup. We're going to go to Mill Drill Hole. We're going to select Geometry. I'm going to select this one. This one here, here. Sometimes when I'm trying to select these tubes, I'll go to I'll hit T on my keyboard for transparent. And the reason why I do that is as I highlight over the tubes, it makes it a little easier to see when it's been selected. Okay, so I got that going. I'm going to say OK. All right, we're going to choose next here. We're in our whole group. For my top of feature, I'm going to set that to 0. For my feature depth, I'm going to set that to 0.5. Okay, so top of feature is where you're going to start cutting from. Feature depth is the incremental depth value, which you can enter or you can input. All right, so we have this set up. The next thing I'll do is go to my machining strategy. I'll go to holes. So I have a spot drill and a drill. I'm going to recompute, and now we can see our dotted lines. We can see it's starting at the top and it's going down. Now, if you want to get a view of what's going on, if you want to see where the tool starts and see how deep it's going to go, that's where we're going to come over into our feature tree here, right? Or our job tree, and we can click on one of these operations and right-click and choose backplot, and then that way we can see our tool. Now, you can hit Control-1. If I click into the CAD window and I hit Control-1, that will give me a top view. If I hit Control-2, that will give me a front view. Once I'm in a front view, I'm sorry, it's Control and then the number 2, Control number 1, Control number 2. Okay, so once I'm in a top view here, then I can click through and I can see exactly where the tool is going to go. This is a great visual aid to really help you see what's going on. All right. Okay, so we have our feature here. If we highlight our feature, it will show a preview of our feature. So it shows the depth. It shows where it starts cutting, and it also shows where it ends cutting. Okay, so that's a very useful way to kind of gauge exactly what's going on with your part. If you highlight or select your feature, it will preview where it's going to start cutting and where it's going to end cutting. A couple of questions coming in. Let's see here. Vic said, that step next to the drill is precisely why I like to default Z to 2 as a rapid plane. You will dogleg that part in the rapid move. Yes, so if you're unfamiliar with dogleg rapids, that can be a problem because you're not, able to accurately see where the dogleg is. So Vic makes a great point. What he's saying is, in the machine setup here, his clearance plane, he wants this number to be 2, so that way he keeps the tool away from the work holding or the part geometry when it goes in between features. Now, something that I normally do if I'm going to have a negative top of job, like this is my 0 position, and so if I wanted to start at the bottom of the shoulder, if we come back in here to this feature and we make this a -1/4 inch, and then we set this one to a 1/4 inch, right? What I want to do is I want to get that tool to come back up higher. You can see right now how the rapid plane isn't high enough to clear the top of the part, and this is exactly what Nick was talking about. Hey Mark, how we doing today? So this is exactly what Vic was talking about, where, hey, I want to make sure that my tool is going to go up further. Now, what I personally do in most scenarios is if I have a negative top of feature here, I generally add that to my rapid plane, whatever that value is. So I'll just plus 1/4 inch. I make sure that the tool is going to come out further up. There are some other settings you could use specifically for drilling, whether you're in a G98 or a G99, so those will play some roles as well. John has a question, does that add drill point? John, I believe what you're asking is, does it have drill tip compensation? And the answer is, for the spot drill or the center drill, it's going to calculate out your depth by this neat little calculator here, which is very useful. And then the other one is if you look at your drill parameters, you have the effective depth and the overall depth. The overall depth, this is the value. This value is what will be posted in your G code, okay? And that overall depth, there's a couple of things that are happening, whether it's a through hole or a blind hole. But yes, your drill tip compensation will happen there. And you can see that with the overall depth. So the effective depth would be when we're at this level here. The overall depth is when we get down to that point position. And that's where that would be. Okay, so let's go ahead and clear this and go back to normal selection. Okay, Mike has a question. Is there a way to make the rapid plane absolute? There isn't a way to make it absolute at this time. So what Mike's asking is, this rapid plane right now is an incremental number from top of job or top of feature here. So from top of feature, we go up incrementally. This value, he's asking if that can be made absolute. At this time, that is not an absolute setting. Okay, Mike? All right, very good. Okay, so we drilled our holes. We talked about some of the things that are going on here. The next thing that I really want to talk about is when we're drilling holes, we may use holes as like pilot holes, or we may want to make these like start positions. So what I'm going to do is I want to drill a hole in the center of these two pockets here, okay? And that, I want to drill a hole there, and then I'm going to want to profile starting in that hole and work its way around. So how would we do that? Well, one of the things that we need to do is get this hole location, okay? So you could come in, you could do like arc and sketch and, do a fixed sketch, and you could kind of use some of the snap points that are set up in the software to kind of pick a position. I mean, that's one way that you could do it. It's not quite as accurate, so I probably wouldn't do it that way. Another way that I would do it is I want to create a construction line from end to end so that I could snap to a midpoint. So how would I do that? I would go to Utilities, Extract Edges, Single. I'm going to pick this space here. I'll hit my space bar, and then I'll hit Cancel. So what that's done is created that wireframe for that face. Once I've done that, I can do a line join, and you can go from here to here and from here to there, and that will create your center line. All right. Then from there, you can go arc, snap, and then you can snap, a hole right at the center of that. Okay. So you can use you can convert your surfaces to wireframe, and then from your wireframe, you can use that as construction geometry to create additional hole locations. Mike has a question. Where did you extract to? Okay. So when you extract geometry or extract wireframe, in SolidWorks they call it convert entities. It's the same type of feature. Other CAD-CAM systems will have an extraction or a conversion method. We call it extract edges. You can find this under Utilities, Extract Edges. You can do single or solid. In today's example, we're doing single. Okay. All right. So we have our layer system over here, or level, or what we call layer system over here. And layers are like pieces of paper, so you can create more pieces of paper, and you can turn the visibility of them on or off. So what I do personally, when I create wireframe off a solid, I will convert, or I'll put it on its own layer so I can isolate. I really like to isolate. It makes it easier to see what's going on. So I will right-click in the layer area, I'll choose Add New Layer, and then I'll make that layer active. So that's the active layer that I'm drawing on. Then I'll go to Utilities, Extract Edges Single. Using Extract Edges Single, I can pick a single face that I want to work with. So in this example, I'm just going to hit my center mouse wheel to get to a rotate. I'll move my mouse over this face here. I'll left click to highlight it, and then I'll hit my space bar to lock it in. All right. So then from there I can turn off the visibility of the other layers. Control 1, I can get back to a top view, and then now I can continue to do my layout here. So I'm going to just grab this one. I'm going to grab that one. You know, arc, snap, you know, maybe it's a 1-inch hole that we want to work with. Boom, boom, and then cancel. All right, so now I've added some additional geometry to give me a drill hole in the center of these pockets. So I go back into my CAM tree now. I can right-click, mill drill hole. All right, we're going to do select geometry. From here, we can pick this hole and that hole. We'll choose OK. All right. You can see it reads the hole diameter, but when you're selecting wireframe, it will default it to a 1/2 inch depth. Okay, so we can either pick or enter our depth. We're going to leave it at a 1/2 inch for now, and then we're going to choose. Well, actually, we'll go next. We got our hole cycle here. We'll compute it, and then that's going to go ahead and spot that hole like this and like that, and then that's going to go ahead and drill this hole like this and like that. Okay, so I want to pause here for just a second. Another big area, so we talked about like the stock setup. We're going through some different features, and again, any questions you guys have, just go ahead and throw them out. But another thing that I wanted to talk about has to do with machining order. Okay, so the order in which your tool path is being generated. So without changing any other settings, I'm just going to launch simulation. So we'll go to modules and then simulation. And then from here, you know, we'll see our tool and we'll see our material. We can slow this down and press play. And what we're going to see is we come in and spot, then we come in and spot the other holes, then we drill the outside holes, and then we drill the center holes. So the point that I'm bringing up here is that even though we have two machining features here, we still posted the spot drills at the same time. Okay, so why did that happen? Did we want it to happen that way, and what are our options with that? Okay, so if we close this out here and we go up into the CAM tree and we go to our milling job and we right click, you're going to see machining order. Okay, so machining order is the order in which your operations will be posted. Now there's three types of optimizations. There's individual feature, there's individual tool per machine setup, and then there's individual tool, which would be tool dominant across multiple setups. Okay, so with individual tool selected, what will happen is the first tool that is called, it will look through the entire CAM tree to find other instances of that tool and post it together. And the idea behind this is to limit tool changes. Okay. So you can see we do our two center drills, then we do our drill and our drill. Oh, you know what? That's a great question. Can you reorder these? You absolutely can. You can select one of them, and you can use these arrows to change the order in which they're going in. Okay, now I can't have it spot drill after the drill. There is some logic built into this, so that I wouldn't say it's foolproof, but you know, there's some logic in here that makes a little more sense. Okay, so yes, you can change the order. You can have it set to individual tool, which is optimized for tool changes, but you can also have it set to individual feature. And when you do it by individual feature, it will post in the order that those features are in the CAM tray. Okay? If that makes sense, everybody go ahead and give me a thumbs up, or raise your hand or say, yeah, I got it, because that is definitely something that will come up again. Now, Erwin has a question here, how to change the color of the tool path. That's a great question. Display is very important. For me, what you're looking at and when you see it, I think makes a big difference. Okay, so if we want to change the color of our tool path in the drawing screen, you would just go over to the operation and right click, and then go down to color, okay? And then from color, you can come in here and change this to whatever color you want, all right? So that's one way to change the color. Jerry had a question, show how to reorder the operations in the tree. Okay, so I think that's a good question too. If you want to reorder the operations in the tree, you can just click, hold, and drag, and you can drag these in different orders. The one thing that you may run into, Jerry, when you're trying to reorder them is if you are trying to take one and put it up at the top, it doesn't work that way. I can't take the 1-inch hole and drag and drop it to where the 1/4-inch one is, but I can take the 1/4-inch hole and drag and drop it to where the 1-inch was. Okay, so for the top feature, you need to come down. The rest of them will go up. Tom has a question. Is posting again needed when changing machining order? Yes, yes. So the workflow is you get your CAD preparation, okay? So you draw the part, measure it, put geometry on certain layers to help with your process plan, okay? Any construction geometry you need, any measurements, anything you need to do, that's in the CAD prep. You can do CAD prep in process, or you can do it at the beginning of the job, okay? The next thing you do is you get into your CAM tree, and from within the CAM tree, you set up the job, you set up the stock, you set up the zero, okay? So now you got your stock and your zero set up. You may come into the tool crib and load a tool crib of common tools that you may use in the shop, okay? You may start adding tools in from the tool library. It depends on, you know, the job you're working on and how many jobs you program a day and that kind of stuff, right? So, okay, so you get your tools set up or not, but you have your job set up, you have your stock set up, and you have your machine set up, okay? So that's your job is the machine and post-processor. Your stock is where material is, and then your machine setup is where your origin is, or your zero, or your work offset, right? Okay, so now that you have that, what you're going to do is you're going to start building in machining features. And the machining features are going to be the tools and tool paths and settings you're going to use to make your part, right? So then once you get that set up, you generally come over and you do some simulations so you can visualize what's going on. Once you're happy with that, you may do some reporting. You could generate a setup sheet. You know, you may want to get a little more information about the tools that you're using or cycle times. You may look at cycle times. You may be quoting this job and not running it yet, so you may come in here to where it says toolpath statistics and get a little more information about each of the toolpaths and how that's working. Once you're kind of happy with all that, you want to get your G-code, because let's face it, CAD-CAM is about G-code. So you'll come up to your milling job, and then you're going to post this, and then that's where you're going to write all your G-code. So Tom says, well, hey, you know, if you change your machining order, do you need to repost? And the answer is absolutely, okay? Because once you post your code, this is the end result. You know, it doesn't go backwards. The code doesn't go back into the tree. All of this is to produce the code, and the code is the last thing you get. So if you want to change the order, you know, we can come in here to our machining order. You know, maybe we want to go tool dominant here. We say OK. We'll say OK. So now we updated the machining order. Then what we would need to do to update the code is right-click and post the code again. Okay? All right, very good. So that's a little bit about the posting order, Tom. Hopefully that made sense. Mark has a question. Can we put 6 pieces of stock on the drawing? Yes, we can. Okay. So if we're talking about multiple pieces of stock, there's a couple of ways to do this. One of the ways to do this is where you might, and what I'll do is I'll just, you know, set a square. And I'll just do 2 pieces right now, okay? So one way you could set multiple pieces of stock when you're doing the stock wizard would be to use wireframe stock, okay? So we can choose wireframe, we can say pick geometry, we can come in here and select our 2 profiles. From there, we can set the depth. The problem with using a wireframe for this method, Mark, is they would both start at the same Z level. If we look at this from a front view, we can see the stock would start at the same Z level for both of these shapes here. Okay, so generally, if I'm working with multiple pieces of stock, instead of using the wireframe method, what I'll use is the solid model method. Okay, so I can use a solid model. So here we have one there, and then we'll go to this one, you know, and maybe this is skinnier and taller. Okay, so now I have these two, what is going to represent, these two blocks here represents my two pieces of stock, right? So in order to set the software up so it knows those are my two pieces of stock, I can go to the stock wizard here. I can choose solid model stock. From there, I can pick the solids that I want to work with. Okay, now I have the stock set up based off these solid models, and you can see I have my two pieces of stock there. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question, Mark. So let me do this. Let me run the stock wizard again. We'll go back to rectangle, and everything looks good there. Doug has a question. Not sure if you mentioned, lots of times I don't want to center drill with a stiff drill like 1 inch. Yes, okay, so you don't have to, like when we're drilling here, you don't have to have a center drill and a drill. You can use the dynamic machining strategies to change that. So if we go to our 1 inch drill here, we can just go to machining strategy. These are our current operations, the operations we're using to machine our hole, right? And these are our available operations. So we can add additional we can add additional operations to process that hole. So if we didn't want a center drill or a spot drill, we can select it, exit out, and then we can just recompute it. And now you can see our 1 inch drill only uses a drill. So hopefully that makes sense for you, Doug. Mike has a question. Can you use solid for stock on the model we are cutting? Of course, yeah, I can use solid for the stock that we're running here. Here's a trick, and I've shown this before. I think this is very useful. When we use the stock rectangular stock type, as we set up our stock here, when we get to the origin stage, a bounding box comes up. Okay, so we have the extremes, the outermost dimensions of this this stock. And then we have this wireframe. This wireframe is very useful. Like in our example, you want to use a solid stock instead of the rectangular method here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click measure, and then I'll click on this. When that bounding box is open or visible, if you measure it, it will put it on whatever layer is active. So that's a real time saver. So then from there, what I can do is just extrude a curve. So I can come in here and select these 4 edges. You know, now I can pull this down to whatever size that I want. So that now is my solid model. If I want to use that as my stock, I just right click, stock wizard, solid model, next, pick solid, pick my solid, spacebar, okay, and now I just set up that stock for a solid model. So hopefully that makes sense there, Mike. Let's see, Humberto. Suppose I have a cast part and I do not have stock material design cast. Is it possible to generate stock cast to add you know, some value on all faces of the drawing? You know, that one's a little more difficult. I guess it is possible that you could, depending on the complexity of the model, Humberto, one way you could do that would be to use like a surface, offset surface. So you could do an offset surface. You could select the solid, you know, and you could have it offset out. So that's another way that you could do that. You might actually run like a finish toolpath on it, Humberto, and then like rough it out and then finish it, but leave extra stock and then save the cut stock model out as an STL. That might be another way to do it. So yeah, there's definitely some different workflow there. Lewis has a question, why the cycle time is always different that's shown in the simulation. The cycle time, so okay, I think what you're asking is there's 3 places where you can see cycle time. Okay, yeah, Humberto, definitely email me over a file or share it in the BobCAD Facebook group and we can go through it together. Let me see here. So cycle times, where are they? So if you go to milling job and you go to toolpath statistics, you know, for my drill cycle here, I'm getting some numbers, right? So I have a total time 8.7, okay? If I come in here and I do generate setup sheet, this will give me an XML document, and if we come in here, we can look at the total cycle time for all the operations, but then we can also get the cycle times for each of them. So this one was like 8.7, I think is what we just said, and this one has come up as 9. So I don't know whether that rounded it or not, but those are pretty close. The last place, or another place that you can find a cycle time, is when we get into simulation. Simulation has some statistics that you can look at. So we can come over here to view, and then we can look at statistics, and then this is going to have some information about the cycle time as well. Now, so your question is, well, let me see, operation, what am I looking for here? Let's go simulation, next stop. Let's go operation, drill. Yeah, so this one has 8.93. So one showed 8.7, one showed 8.9, or maybe it was 8.9, and then the other one went 9. Let me check it again. So why might it look different? Well, there could be different calculations that are being used or different information that's being fed, but you should find them all to be pretty close. Let me see what it was. This is 8.7. So 8.7, 8.9, and 9, they're all pretty close. Not accounting for tool change rapids, that is correct. No, rapids are accounted for, Mark. If you come in here under your, let's see here. If we go under current settings for your job, you have your rapid feed is here. You also have your link back cutting feed here, and then you also have your maximum spindle speed. So if you have a machine that's over 10,000 RPM, you'll have to adjust this. Otherwise, it won't post more than 10,000 RPM. Your rapid feed is here, so depending on what your rapid feed for your machine, that's accommodated for. And then your maximum cutting feed rate is when you're using the adaptive toolpath. We use this for the non-cutting moves for repositioning. So, you know, you might cut at 50 inches a minute, but when you have it repositioned as non-cutting, and it's not in a rapid, it's in a feed, you don't want it to feedback at 50, you want it to feedback faster, and you can use this number here to adjust that. All right, let's see here. So we did some stock. Let me back up here just a little bit. Let's get rid of some of this stuff. All right, so we'll go back to our model. So we drilled some holes. We drilled like a feeder hole here. Really, the next thing that I wanted to get into is the profile routine. You know, now maybe I want to profile this. So I'm going to right-click. I'm going to do Insert Mill 2-Axis. I'm going to choose Select Geometry. And from Select Geometry, you know, I can do a couple of things. Now, I talked about this before. Right now, we see our two feature, like our 1-inch hole feature being displayed. Okay, so why is that being displayed when we're in the middle of selecting some other geometry? Okay, so what's happening here, let me cancel out of this. Let me cancel out of that. Wherever your mouse is, like if your mouse is on this feature, that feature will be previewed. If your mouse is on this feature, if you have that feature highlighted, that feature will be previewed. So if you have that feature highlighted, when you launch the next toolpath, it's still going to display. So what I recommend you do is you go up to the machine setup here and right-click and load in that next feature. Okay, so Mill 2-Axis, we do Select Geometry. Now you can see nothing is being displayed, so it won't confuse you. All right, we're going to come in. How are we going to select this? We want to select these inside pocket walls. We want to do a profile routine right now. Okay, so how are we going to do that? Well, one way to do that would be to click around the edges. Okay, so we can click one edge at a time and we can click around, and this will get the job done, but it's definitely not the most efficient way to do it. You know, you click around, click around, click around. Now you could do that with, surface edges, or you could do that with wireframe. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it, if we zoom in here, I'm just going to right click on this edge, and then I can choose constant Z or loop. If I choose constant Z, it's going to be all the geometry that's flat in a Z-plane. If I choose loop, I'll be given the option to pick either around this surface here or around this surface here. In our example, we're going to choose constant Z. We'll say that. You can see it picks it up all in one shot. So instead of clicking around one by one, let's use the chain selecting for surfaces if you're working off a surface or solid. If you're working off a wireframe, it's shift left click in order to do a chain selection. But we get this geometry set up here. We can go in and set our depths, but we're going to leave our depths the way that it is. We're going to say OK. All right, so now, you know, we've gone through, we've selected our geometry. We're going to look at our machining strategies. I'm just going to look at a profile rough right now. We're going to next, we'll come in and pick our tool size. We'll look at some of our patterns. We're going to do a standard profile to begin with. We'll look at, you know, our leads here. How are we going to come into the wall? So I'm going to do like a blend maybe. So we'll do a blend here, and then we'll compute. All right, so when we do this, you can see that, you know, the tool is going to lead in. So we're going to backplot here. So the tool is going to lead in, and then it's going to work its way around, and then it's going to come back out. All right, now one of the things that you'll notice is that I have the drilling cycle being displayed, and I have this profile being displayed. So I'm getting a lot of toolpath on the screen, so it may not be clear exactly what's going on, which is again why I would isolate. One of the ways you can isolate is by blanking or hiding your toolpath. So you can right click on machine setup and go to blank on blank toolpath, and that will hide all the toolpaths that are on the screen. And then you can click on one of the toolpaths or one of the operations at a time and be able to just display that operation. Now if I look at my drill hole here and I look at my profile here, you can see that this is starting close to the center. The thing is at this time, let's go to this one here. At this time you can see that it's close to the center, but that's just the way the math worked out. Okay, so when you're looking at your lead in and lead out options, you know, you can just come into your leads and you just want to look at these settings here. Sometimes you need to do a little math to get it to go where you need it to be. Okay, so like in this case here, you know, by setting it to 1/4 inch, it's definitely closer to this wall. If I want it closer to the center of this, I can edit this. I can go to my leads and set what my lead value is and recompute. Okay, so now you can see that's still closer to the center. It's not exactly in the center. You know, you can do a little math to figure out the exact center to get it in the center for that hole there. Okay, on this shape here, we have it come down. So it's going to come down, and then it's going to go around, and then it's going to come back out and move over to the next one. All right. If I want to change my start point location, maybe I didn't want it to lead in from here. Maybe I wanted it to lead in from this wall. How would we do that? If we go over to our default chain start point, you'll see that there is an arrow here. Okay. Some of you may be asking, well, why is the lead in over here if the start point is over here? Well, there is some gouge protection that occurs, so it will move it if it's finding, you know, what it deems as a gouge or a potential gouge. Okay, but in order to move it, we just right-click and choose Modify, and then when we do that, we can click on the middle of the line or the end of the line or 0, 45, 90, and you can set where you want it to be. Okay, this arrow is indicating where it will lead in from. So I moved it to here. I'll hit my space bar or right click OK to lock it in. I'll recompute, and you see that it moved. If I right click, modify, I move it to another location. OK, compute, you can see that it moves. Okay, so that's the way that you can move it. Now, on your inside shapes, a lot of times it will select in the proper direction for climb milling on your inside shapes. On your outside shapes, a lot of times you just need to reverse it. If you want to change what direction you're cutting, you can click on the arrow itself, and that will change its direction. Or the other thing you can do is right-click on the default start point and choose reverse direction. Okay, so here we have our two profiles. Right now, we're just doing it as a single pass. So if we come in here and edit this, we could say parameters, and then we might want to do multiple passes. So you can adjust how much it takes per pass here. So that way you can make multiple copies. Now there is, let's see here, is there a way to have it branch in different locations other than clicking each individual piece? I'm not sure what you're asking there, Mike. Are you talking about the selection or the lead-in position? So if you can add a little more detail, that'd be great. We got about 10 minutes to go here, so it's getting close to that 2 p.m. mark Eastern Standard. So if you guys have some more questions, you definitely want to fire it away. I want to start opening up to open Q&A so that any other questions you guys may have, we can answer. When selecting chains, I still have some confusion about origin selection. If you have the time to touch on that and show different options. So Erwin, you're talking about machine setup locations, and Mike, you're talking about when selecting chains, other than clicking each individual piece. Okay, so chain selection is really simple, Mike. You have a rectangle and you're in selection mode, okay? What you don't want to do is click on this, 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 and this, because that takes a little more time than is necessary, okay? A lot of times you don't want to window pick. You can window pick, but that can be problematic as well because there could be double entities and you could end up selecting geometry you didn't really want, etc. Okay, so what is the chain selection method? Hold Shift on your keyboard, left click on the profile, and then if it's contiguous, it will select all the way around. Okay, Mike, so that's how that works. Again, when you're in selection mode, Shift, left click, and then if it's a chain, it will go all the way around. All right, now Erwin, he had some more questions about the machine setup location here. The easiest way to set up multiple parts, various vices, various positions, currently using setups. Okay, that one, I don't know if I'm going to have enough time for you on that one, Mike, but I think you did put your email in there, so we could talk about that more one-on-one, or you could join the BobCAD After Dark group and post a question there, and I'll be sure to answer it as well. Mike has a question. I have a slot in a multi-step round with angle. It won't constant loop, and they are all at different Z's, so constant Z doesn't work. Okay, so Mike, if you don't have constant Z, you can flatten the geometry if we're doing like 2D profiling. So if you choose, and I'll show you what I mean real quick, and then we'll get to your Erwin on your origin options. If we go Utilities, Extract Edges, Single, all right, if we just extract edges single and we pick on an edge here and we hit spacebar, then that edge will be extracted at its location, okay? Now, if we use Project to Z, we could select this edge, and that edge, and maybe this edge, right? And what it's going to do now is it's actually going to put them all on the same Z level, okay? So you can see these are all now, even though I picked them from different Z levels, it will put them all on the same Z level, so that will make it easier to do a chain selection, to change to different corners, etc. Okay, so hopefully that answers your question there, Mike. And then Erwin will pick up on your machine setup locations here. Okay, so we're going to get in here. We'll go into our CAM tree. We have our machine set up right now. Let's see here. Oh, I didn't mean for that to show up. What do we got? Let me get rid of this model here. All right, so let's edit our machine setup location, okay, or our origin, okay? And if we want, right now it's set to top center. If I want to change it to a different location, I would click origin, and then I can use this bounding box. I don't have to click exactly on the point in the corner here. I can just click on this bounding box, left click, and then it will snap that right to the corner, okay? If I click on origin, all right, and then I want it maybe to be in this corner, I'll just move close to this corner here, left click, and you'll see it will move over to that corner. Does that make sense, Erwin? So you can snap it to any location just by clicking on origin and then using some reference geometry if I wanted it to be the lower bottom here. Mike has a question. I also have a question about Z-level roughing, lead-in, start points, but we should talk about that out of the webinar. Yeah, definitely. And actually, any of you, if you have any specific questions about the software that you'd like to learn more about, you can always email us. We can set up a one-on-one demo. I think that's one of the best ways in which to really learn about the different features and functions in the software. Mark has a question. I couldn't call chamfer drill feature and chamfer mill feature with same tool, mill drill. Had to lie to the software. Couldn't call a chamfer drill feature and a chamfer mill feature with the same tool. So what he's talking about here is you have, let's say, well, I guess you're talking about drilling. Yeah, different. So one of them here is when he's doing a chamfer drill and chamfer mill. Okay, so why can't you drill? Okay, so yeah, these are definitely different categories of tools within the software, a chamfer drill and a chamfer mill. And so they're not the same tool type. So yeah, you would have to use the same tool number in order, even though they're two different tool types, in order to use the same tool. So that's what's going on there. I'd like to see more about exactly how you were trying to do that, Mark, because there may be another way around it. Let's see here. Drake has, how's the easiest way to compensate for tool wear using an offset? You know, Drake, I think that's a really good question there. Can you tell me what control you're running on? Do you have a Fanuc? Do you have a Haas? What control do you have? So let's start there because that will tell me a little more about what's going on. Can we send you a file directly? Yes, Mike, you could send me a file directly. My email is al, which is AL, at BobCAD.com, and that's how you can get a file directly to me. Erwin says, yes, can we change the axis without moving the part? Yes, you could change the axis without moving the part. If we wanted to do another setup, like when we turn the part over and we need to machine on the other side, what we're going to do here is a mill, additional functions, insert setup, right-click, edit on the setup, origin, pick our origin location. Right now you can see Z is going down. So what we want to do is this one here will reverse our Y direction, and that will put Z going up in this example. So it's that coordinate system, Erwin, and sometimes you got to click on, because it's all connected, so depending on which axis you clicked on, it will flop it. So you definitely need to practice that some more. Hey, John, thank you so much for sharing some time with me here. No mill drill in library. Mill, drill, so you're trying to drill and mill with the same tool, Mark? You could create a custom tool profile for that if you wanted. Drake said it's a Fanuc. From what I understand with the Fanuc, your D and H values need to be different, so that's one thing that we would need to talk about. If we look at a tool here, you can see the tool number is 4, the H number is 4, and the diameter offset is 4. So on a Fanuc, I guess on the table, your diameter offsets, like you add a 10 to it, you know, so it'd be 4 and 14. So another way that you could handle that is in the post processor. For the diameter offsets, you could add 10. You know, so that way it formats it automatically so you don't have to go in there and do that. When you're dealing with wear comp specifically, Drake, okay, the tool table on the control you're using for the wear value. So the D value that you're setting on the control is used for the wear value. And then in the software where it says patterns, you're going to have system compensation and machine compensation. You'll have them both on. System compensation means BobCAD will offset for the cutter. Machine compensation means we'll look at the tool table for that D value, and that D value will be your wear compensation. So that's how that works there, Drake. If you have more questions about that, definitely let me know. We're at the 2 o'clock, so that means the 5-minute bell is about to ring here. Let's see if we can grab a couple of more of these questions here. Mark says, extract to plane in YZ. All right, so If I want to change the plane that I'm going to extract to, what I can do is change the plane that I'm drawing in, and then I can do utilities, extract edges single, projected Z0. You could pick on one of these spaces, spacebar, and then it will project to Z0 for the active plane that you're on. So I hope that answers your question. I guess here's another one. The drill mill is an end mill with a drill point, multitasker. Yes, the way that I would pick that one up, Mark, is I would create a custom tool profile so that you can display it as a mill drill. If we go to tools and we get into the tool library here, I have a couple of them set up. Let's see here. Here's like a V tool, a custom profile. When you're creating your tools, there's this option that says use tool profile, or this one would remove it, but you could use a wireframe profile in order to define your tool. So that way you can show it as a mill drill tool, okay? Dave has a question. I really like to see how you were planning to cut the top two radiuses, and I think that's a great question, Dave. There's a lot of ways that we can come in here and cut these top two radiuses. Today's webinar is about 2D milling. We could use a corner rounder, so that I guess would be considered 2D milling, but really when we start to get into these surfaces here, we're going to start looking at 3D tool paths to machine them. There are a number that we can use. It could be a mill standard, mill pro, mill premium. Lots of different options there. So I believe that's what we're going to pick up next week, is getting into some of the 3D tool paths. Let's see. My version 30 stock wizard only has the rectangle. Others are grayed out. Why is that? Drake, you're probably running the Mill Express software. So if you look at your license and then you look at what's available over here, you're probably on Mill 2-axis, which is why you're only seeing rectangular stock. Let's see. Sorry about that, Grant. You'll have to try to get here on time, but we will email you out a recording. Steps until you puke on red. I'm not sure what you mean there, but hey, that's all the time that I have for you guys here today. I do have some good news for you, though. Some pretty exciting news. It's the beginning of March here. We have a lot of things that are going on. There is a promotional offer that we have for today's webinar attendees. Anybody who's attended today's webinar, we're going to email you over the promotional number to call so that you have it. So be looking out for that. That will be coming here real soon. You'll want to call and talk with your account manager and cash in on the savings with the webinar promotion. Otherwise, I appreciate each and every one of you spending some time with us here today. I know you guys are busy and time is money, so I appreciate you spending some time with me here. As always with BobCAD, you can expect fewer steps, better cuts, and more profit. Look forward to seeing you guys in the next one. Next week, let's pick up the 3D on this part, and I think that will be really cool. If you guys have any other suggestions, go ahead and let me know. Keep an eye out for that webinar promo number. Take advantage of some of the training tools that we have, the seminars, the online training, the in-house training. Come here to Florida during the cold time of the year and really enjoy the sunny weather and learn all the tips and tricks you can get with the BobCAD system. Until next time, we'll see you then. Thanks a lot, guys.